So at this point, I want to open up to some questions to the audience. Does anyone have any questions? Please come to one of the mics.
Hello. Okay, this question is for Ashok. I read this article on these future trends for mobile, and one trend there's one alternative platform, right? And you mentioned the Tyson. Could you comment on that, on Tyson, and maybe also on this new proposal from Mozilla on boot to Gecko?
Okay. So if you read that article very clearly, I didn't pick one as Tyson. I said that there is one alternate platform that is going to evolve. Okay. The reason being, okay, iOS and Android have become much stronger, and then all the other parts of the ecosystem is looking for an alternate platform with respect to operators or with respect to device manufacturers. Because all the device manufacturers are all the device manufacturers other than Apple are putting their eggs into one basket called Android. Okay? So most OEMs are starting to look at an alternate platform, and one of the reasons that everybody is going after Tizen or the Windows Phone 7 or the root to Gecko, right? So out of these three, one would emerge with respect to that alternate platform that's coming up. Okay, you saw a strong move by Nokia to move towards Windows Phone 7. That was expected to gain a little bit more traction in the market with respect to more operators and more OEMs getting there. There's a little bit of a change there with respect to a couple of operators in the US backing Windows Phone 7 again, right? And Nokia being one OEM, and then the other OEMs would follow suit as well.
Okay, but do you think that a platform like this boot to Gecko that is proposed by Mozilla, that it basically proposes to use web standards for the platform, do you think that something like this would have a chance?
Right now it is too early to say that. I think the backing of that platform is at a very, very low point right now. I don't expect that to happen in the next at least 1.5 to 2 years.
Thank you.
In the US market, right, for example, at AT&T, 70% plus of the smartphones sold in the past couple of quarters were iPhones. And at Verizon, that number was about 50 to 55%. So the US-based carriers are very concerned, actually. I met some of the executives at the CTIA, a wireless trade show in New Orleans, and they expressed the concern that ideally they want 3 platforms, right, to exist, coexist at the same time. 2 is a little bit dangerous and makes everybody uneasy. So there will be another platform. Maybe it's Windows 8. Maybe it's something else. But that's what everybody's hoping for. Three platforms. Other questions?
In order to provide user experience, especially for rich applications, one of the ways to deal with that is to be able to offload some of those tasks out somewhere else, maybe at the edge, maybe in the cloud. In order for something like this to happen, we need to see much tighter partnerships emerging between the wireless carriers providers and the cloud providers. It seemed for a while there that there were such partnerships on the horizon, but I'm not sure if that is the trend that's happening right now. So the question is, to what extent do you see these kinds of tighter partnerships evolving, and how tight do they need to be? The second question emerges as a result of that. So now if I have, as a user, if I have the wireless provider, the cloud provider, and perhaps other people in between, who do I trust? What level of trust do I need to have in the data that I generate, I download, as it passes through these various providers and stored, manipulated in different places?
So in terms of the first question, there can be 2 ways of thinking about it. One is that over the top will continue to prevail. And so let's say if someone has come up with an innovative application or service, that company is availing of the cloud to launch the service. And in terms of the tight integration, essentially in that service or in that service platform, there has to be the ability to understand the network and provision for the network. So it's still over the top, but it's not like how content providers have dealt with things traditionally, that it's the carrier's problem, it's not our problem. But if you look at how, even for instance, YouTube has emerged. So YouTube, when it started, it never bothered about quality. Hulu came in, it started bothering about quality. Today, it's doing actually quite a few things to save on the network. So on one end, it can be content providers or application providers who are understanding that you cannot ignore the network, and they are doing themselves things to understand the network and be gentle on the network. The other can be, I think that the only advantage I can think of in terms of these rate plans that carriers around the world are coming up with is essentially, it's making me, the consumer, very wary of using, for instance, services like Netflix. So that now pushes Netflix to come up with 3 different tiered plans, as Netflix announced last year. So that, I think, forces content providers and carriers to sit together and cooperate. I think that cooperation is coming. I think that cooperation is coming in various other ways, that carriers are starting to come up with their own cloud services. They call them federated clouds, where the carriers also realizing that if the carriers can enable the content providers or the application developers to actually reside in their cloud, in their core network, then the experiences for their users will be much better. So actually carriers around the world are thinking how to monetize their federated clouds by opening it up to content providers. So from that angle, that's the third angle I'm talking of, that cooperation might come. Your second question is difficult to answer. I don't know whether any of you will take that second question, but you want to? Okay.
See, to answer the first question again, right? Okay, Verizon and AT&T has opened their APIs to external third-party application developers. That is one. The second is some of the operators in the US are already working with all these content providers at the back end. You may not know it, but they are, okay? So they know the tax that's happening on the network with respect to, for example, YouTube was a good example. And that was the reason m.YouTube was formed about 1.5, 2 years back, right? Okay, so those are discussions that are happening at the back end with respect to Netflix as well. People are, as Sujit is dissecting the data that's flowing through the network in respect of video, Netflix at the top and all that, right? All these operators are starting to look at, okay, who are the 5 topmost guys who are using this network? And then, okay, how can that data be reduced or offloaded, or what can be done, right? Okay, we've had tons of discussions around this topic there. The second one is more of a, as I said before, right? Okay, so currently all these experiences are vertical experiences, okay? Data is stored by Netflix for a certain user in a certain way. Data for Hulu is stored by Hulu in a certain way. Data on your healthcare is stored by Google or Oracle in a separate way, right? Okay, so there should be one of the, in the earlier presentation that I was talking about, there should be a way to provide cross search and recommendations, okay? Those federated things are happening as mobility expands its horizon into multiple areas.
Actually, if I may just quickly answer her second question, in this way, as I was thinking about it. If you look at the most successful mobile cloud services today, as Ashok you mentioned, the ones where you store your data, be it enterprise data or be it mostly today your files, your photos, videos, songs, everything, and there also a concern comes, right? Privacy, security, and I think it's going to be a balance between the enterprises or the application developers providing for it, and you also starting to sense more and more, and you had mentioned this in a different forum, that privacy is something that is traded off with convenience. So I think that it's a very relevant question, and we'll have to see how it emerges.
First, an observation. When looking at cloud services and cloud functionality, we can categorize it basically into 3 directions. The computational one, which relieves the mobile devices from complex computation and allow it to be executed at the back end, then storage, and then synchronization. So synchronization, I think, will always be there. But when looking at the other 2 set of functionality, the storage and the computation, and when looking at the graphs of increased cloud services that are being provided to us as mobile users, and we see a linear and even exponential growth. I wonder whether this is indeed the right approach or the right trend, because let's just look at it from a slightly different point of view of the handheld device. The handheld device is currently at a unique situation where storage is still relatively limited, and the CPUs, the ARM-based CPUs, are an order of magnitude weaker than what we have in our laptops or desktops. But as applications remain at about the same computational complexity, and as the CPUs are going to increase in power, and soon enough, even if we just follow the Moore's law, we will have powerful enough mobile devices, and since the increase in traffic will require the service provider to respond by significantly increasing the price on bandwidth, aren't we going to see a reverse direction, which means the trend will go back to the handheld devices because they will be strong enough to run the applications and to have the storage, and we will see a decline in reliance on cloud services. Again, I don't think that synchronization will disappear, but maybe storage and computational. What do you think about that?
My prediction is that won't happen, and here's why. So first of all, the devices are already very powerful, and it just depends on what your perspective is. The phone I have in my pocket is more powerful than the first processors we launched EC2 on a servers 6-7 years ago. So they're already pretty powerful devices. Yes, they will get more powerful. I think the reasons, though, why we won't go back to a very heavy client model are, I can think of two at the moment. The one is, it comes back to an argument of innovation. One of the reasons we have this explosion of 18 billion applications we're going to develop is because having a very cloud-centric, server-centric software intelligence model means that the inventors and operators of those applications can update them in real time all the time. Any kind of heavyweight application distributed across 7 billion devices, much harder to change. So the changes in the data center will go far ahead of the changes we can make to the applications. The applications on the devices need to be relatively stable. Not saying totally stable, but they need to be a lot more stable. So I think we'll continue to have this split in computation, and maybe the needle will move a little bit as the capabilities of the network and the devices improve. The complexity of the application that can be offloaded onto the device itself improves, but fundamentally you'll still have this backed by large data centers hosting the majority of the computation and the storage. The second thing is convenience. I have this device. I had a Google Nexus 1 a couple of years ago, and I switched it out for this Samsung Skyrocket thing a month or two ago, and the experience was just totally seamless. I had to do nothing other than enter my Google password, and everything was there. I didn't have to worry about anything at all. So I think that's really highly valued. I don't think we want to go back to a world, and I don't think consumers will allow us to go back to a world of the complexity involved in the way we manage PCs, laptops, for example. I personally don't see that happening. I think those forces are fundamentally much more important than how many bytes are on the network, or is storage on the phone cheaper than storage in the data center. So while the devices will get more powerful, I think the back-end stuff will be much cheaper and much more powerful, and the algorithms and the work involved in computing those applications will get exponentially more complex.
These devices are multiplying. It's not a client, it's multiple clients, and B, they're becoming more and more disposable. It's almost to the point where I switch devices like I might switch rental cars. And the reality is you can't have a lot of complex client-side state management to accomplish that. Now, what will change is the power of these client-side capabilities, and the cheapness of storage means that you're going to be caching more data locally, you're going to be processing that data in ways that allow the user experience to be better, but you're not going to, everything here is essentially going to be disposable and recreatable through the cloud onto another device as soon as you ask for that.
No, I think that if I got the essence of his question, so he is accepting the synchronization cross-platform aspect, but the question is specific about the computing aspect and storage. And storage, I think Andy mentioned, and I completely agree with my other panelists, in terms of computing, and this is based on my own experiences, my own profiling. So I profiled various applications. I profiled, for instance, World of Warcraft and Call of Duty. And what I see is that for instance, the rendering capabilities and the what is needed, the computing needed, the GPU needed by the applications, like I mentioned these two applications, and what is available in the best platforms, the mobile platforms, that gap is actually widening. So I believe that there is a widening gap between the richness of the applications and what they need, if they can afford to have that, and what the mobile devices are. Secondly, I don't believe that the mobile devices, because of other constraints, can continue to go and become supercomputers. Battery is a big problem. We are seeing a CGA compound annual growth rate of about 8 to 10% in battery. Heating and cooling are big problems. Cannot do that. I mean, yes, there are alternative techniques being developed. So because of those things, I would like my mobile device to be disposable. I would not like it to be a supercomputer, and it cannot become a supercomputer because of all these other things. So I'm just narrowly focusing on your computing aspect, and I'm saying that yes, the computing capabilities of devices are growing, but they're lagging behind how the applications are developing, and B, that the computing capabilities on devices will be constrained by our battery capabilities and our heating, cooling, packaging capabilities, thermal characteristics.
Yes, I have a question regarding the standard. I have a question for the panelists regarding whether we need a standard for the cloud service providers to have a standard way to provision their cloud services for all the smart end devices, like smartphone or iPad. If the answer is yes, when is the best time to define that? If the answer is no, why?
Standards will come, and I think standards usually address two areas. One is the sort of lowest common denominator thing that everybody does, and right now I don't think that exists. The other standards, which I think are far more important, have more to do with interoperability. And I'll give you an example. So one of the things we did at Amazon was we invented a new way for tenants in this system to express network policy. And as long as you're within the Amazon facilities, that system works pretty well, but there's no extension of that outside of the network. You have to fall back to what's the IP address, which is kind of the old way of doing things and doesn't really tell you very much. So standards around interoperability between different services, particularly for on-the-wire communications, I think will be the early need. Ultimately, though, customers will decide. Customers at the customers in this case probably being the developers, consumers of applications. I think standards in the how to provision compute resources and storage systems, and I think we're a generation away from that, frankly, because I think we're still just beginning to grapple with what it means to do these things. So I'm not saying ultimately it becomes important. I'm just saying right now I think we're in the invention, innovation phase, maybe more like, processes were in the the 50s or something along those lines. It's very early days for that.
Having spent quite a bit of time doing ITF and W3C standards, my impression right now is we can't even get 10 people in a room to agree on the problem that we're solving, much less the means for defining the standard and the solution. It's still as true today as it was when I was doing this stuff. The trouble with standards is that, or the great thing about standards is that there are so many to choose from. And as long as that dynamic exists, you have to have other ways of picking winners. And what we found in this space is the marketplace does a pretty good job as long as it's free to chase innovation. A lot of the problems that we run into today are where other factors. I'll give you a very simple example. The way that AT&T was broken up and how that affected the cost for terminating local phone calls has had enormous ripple effects on how services are provisioned, and you've got entire startups that are getting their whole business model is based on the fact that if you get enough people to dial into your conference bridge, that the local exchange connection fees are enough to make some pretty good money, right? That sort of thing hugely distorts what happens in the marketplace. And so, you know, it's the nobody's going to disagree that standards are important, but it's critical that you're able to get the right group of people together that can agree on the problem. And you know, right now there are so many things in cloud and mobile where just doing that is a tremendous undertaking.
To me personally, standards is not a technical problem at all. It's more of a commercial problem. Getting more of the right-minded people to start looking at things is the most important thing. And okay, if they see that collectively they can win, it'll evolve.
It's actually, I guess, more of a comment, which maybe will turn into a question, which is, you know, the different players in the marketplace, endpoints and network and cloud providers, all like to say basically that the you know, rest of the components of the system should be dumbed down and are irrelevant, right? So if you're a you know, cloud provider, an endpoint provider, you know, it's the keep it simple, stupid argument for the network, right? And this whole notion that somehow everything moves to the cloud, even though I love the cloud, always rubs me the wrong way. And specifically, if you think about discontinuities in endpoints, there are several on the horizon, one of which comes to mind is electroholographic displays. And the problem with electroholographic displays is not a display issue, it's a computational issue. So it requires immense power in the endpoint. And you know, it's not going to be here in a year, but it'll be here in 3 years or 5 years or whenever. So I guess my question for the panelists is, why is there this theory that everything will move to the cloud and the endpoint device will be so dumb when in fact we haven't seen that historically, right? In other words, yes, the cloud has immense power doing, you know, natural language processing, search, etc., but that will migrate into the endpoint device. And things like netbooks, you know, never really, or Chromebooks, you know, they're not capturing anywhere near what really rich and powerful devices have been in terms of market share. Back to your profitability numbers.
So I would make one observation that I think you contradicted yourself. That on the one hand you said that why do we think that the end devices will get dumber and simpler when it's never happened in history, and then said presumably you're referring to the iPads, Android devices, and so on, have had much more adoption than the netbook devices. Maybe I misunderstood what you're saying, but those two things seem contradictory to me. The wild explosion.
No, my point is rich endpoints collaborate with a rich cloud, and it doesn't have to be one is, you know, dumbed down and the other has to be where all the intelligence lies. Yeah. It's a collaborative system.
It just seems to me where we've gotten to is an environment where what the consumer values is that richness of experience, the user interface, the fantastic display, the beautiful interaction. But it's a much simpler device than a netbook or a laptop. And in combination with that is you have these very interesting applications that have these very complex social graphs and very difficult algorithms where different services have to communicate with each other in a way that is impossible to do on an end device. It seems to me that's the best of both worlds. And maybe there are the photographic display application you mentioned, I don't know what the architecture of this thing is, but if it's particularly computationally intensive, it seems to me that having half a dozen data centers optimized for that purpose with displays streaming out to end devices, if that's possible, that seems to me like a pretty smart idea. I just don't think there's one rule necessarily that fits all models, and I don't think that looking at our infrastructure at a moment in time is necessarily any indication of what those services need to look like in 5 to 10 years' time. But I think the combination of very consumer-friendly, very beautiful consumer devices, somewhat disconnected and asynchronous from the real geeky stuff on how to manage petabytes of data and how to compute social graphs among 1,000 friends in order to come up with a toothpaste recommendation, having those two things separate just seems like a very good idea.
What finally made the tablet experience work, and I'll specifically call it the iPad because it was the first one to properly do this, is when we got rid of the mouse. That whole pointer and the indirect nature of that user experience, God bless Xerox, they got something started way back when, but we haven't been able to escape from it, and our whole user experience on the PC has gotten locked into this, and it's horrendous. It's not natural, right? You want to be able to, and not having finger interaction with the screen, right? Think about how we interact with PCs. It is not a natural experience. It's learned, typing, all this. This is not something that is natural. The reason why the iPad was successful is that it finally took a step back and said, okay, I'm going to interact with my fingers on the touch screen. That is a natural experience. And as a developer, it forces you, when you're building an application, to say, what is it that I'm providing and how can I make that as simple and straightforward? I no longer have the crutches of being able to do radio buttons and checkboxes and complicated UIs that require me to train my user, right? I need to be able to provide an experience that's visceral, that I can put my hands on. And frankly, I enjoy surfing the web with that way better than I do on a PC. Now that's what mobile's about. And cloud is about enabling that experience in a way that makes it much more natural to connect with services that should have little or no understanding of what's actually happening on the client, right? Certainly no state being kept. That's what's going on now. If things are moving to the cloud, it's because of that, not because there's some hard and fast rule that says, well, the fad last year was client server and the fad next year is cloud, right? It's about the fact that in order to have a good user experience with data and applications, it's a huge improvement to do this with your fingers on a mobile device, right? And cloud makes a lot of things that were difficult to do when you have an isolated device very simple and natural.
Yeah, I mentioned in the beginning that I think that it's going to be hybrid applications because there's no denying the fact that the devices are going to keep improving in terms of user interface, improving in terms of the sensors that it has, various different things that the cloud obviously will not have. On the other hand, for instance, so one of the reasons I think we like our devices is because we think that they're personal. We like personal experiences with them. And so to enhance these personal experiences, I think that there'll be a lot of media analytics that can be done on the cloud. So if you have to churn all that data, do all the data mining, you don't want to do on your device, you want to do it somewhere else. So I think that it's going to be a cooperative model where sometimes you'll see applications which are actually getting assistance from the devices to give them information based on which the application is going to make some decisions. And sometimes it's going to be the other way around, that is, the device is going to just use the cloud in ways Andy was mentioning about. And so, both of these models are going to coexist. And I think the better applications will be the ones which are leveraging both of them, the growth in both of them.
What are we not talking about today that you think should be on the top of the agenda?
True electronic identity. I want to be able to have my driver's license on this device and have it accepted. What's keeping us from doing that?
I have tons of stuff in my mind right now. Context awareness, context-aware solutions, right? Okay, so the mobile device that you carry is the device that knows it all, what you do and what you don't do, okay? And there are not many experiences that are provided based on those knows and not knowns. As of now, I think we are starting to see that coming up. Google announced some stuff with the Jelly Bean. So I would see that, okay, I would say that, okay, there's going to be much more context-aware experiences that are going to come up in the next few years.
Sujit?
Yeah, I think that if I look at how our behaviors have changed in terms of content, clearly we have started rejecting linear content, except for one or two areas like sports or things like that. Clearly, the presence of DVRs in our family rooms have changed the way we are watching TV, and so we want more control over our content. I think the big trend that will go in the future is where the content can be really personalized, and not personalized as in terms of which video I'll see or which music I'll hear, but really there's a director's cut. The director has made a show like this, or this is what the news program is, and I want to see it or experience it in different ways, in really personalized ways. I think there's going to be a lot of innovation in that, and I think that both the cloud and the devices are going to be big players in that.
We've only just started to see new applications get built. I don't think trying to regulate them and centralize them and telcoize them is going to work. I think the pressures we're seeing today are largely the result of 20 years later, the internet finally meets telco head on. And I hope the internet model wins, which means that application developers are free to innovate, consumers are free to get their content wherever they want to on any kind of device, which means we probably need more kinds of hybrid networking models where we're not trying to backhaul everything to the tower on the hill.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for our panelists. So please give them a round of applause, please. Thank you.